Hi, and welcome back to Psychology with me, Mr. Snyder. And today we're going to talk about essentially just what personality is. We're starting our unit on personality, what personality is, and the psychodynamic theory of personality. So essentially, we're just going to do learning target 1 and 2. We'll talk about stability and change and what personality is, and we'll talk about Freud and Neo-Freudians and the psychodynamic theories of personality. So what is personality? We all know what makes up our personality, but it's difficult to put down on paper. It is the unique and relatively stable. So you got to have those two things. It's unique to each individual, and it's relatively stable ways in which people think, feel, and behave. Now, some people may confuse this with the terms character and temperament, so let's make sure we get those straight. Character is the value judgments that are made about a person's morals or ethical behavior, and then a person's temperament is enduring characteristics that are with a person since they were born, such as irritability or adaptability. So your personality develops over the time, but it's pretty much based on your temperament, which is with you since you were born. There's a couple different theories about personality to explain about why it changes over time. And when it solidifies and when it changes, etc. The plaster hypothesis is one of the oldest, and it is the idea that personality develops until about age 30, then it firms up and sets throughout your middle age, and then begins to crumble as your cognitive abilities decline with old age. Then there's an updated one called the soft plaster hypothesis, which allows for changes after age 30, but they're not going to be as large or dramatic as the ones between 21 and 30. And they were still doing research into personality. Some people thought your personality never changed at all, but now newer research is demonstrating that there are interesting changes in a person's major personality traits throughout adulthood. And we'll go over trait theory some other time. There's no single explanation of personality because it's so difficult to measure precisely and to measure scientifically. And the different perspectives that do look at personality tend to examine where the source of the personality is coming from, such as the individual behavioral dispositions or situational processes. So is it within you? Is it your environment that shapes your personality? Is it conscious factors? Is it unconscious factors? We're going to take a lot of different looks from different angles at personality. A couple of those are the psychodynamic perspective, which focuses on the role of the unconscious mind in personality development. The behaviorist perspective focuses on the environment, on your behavior and your personality development. Humanistic focuses on the role of your own free will in each person's conscious life experiences and choices. And trait personality focuses on where you're at right now, which characteristics do you have, and what makes up your personality. But first, let's get to psychodynamic. So Sigmund Freud founds the idea of psychoanalysis during the Victorian age in Europe, which is a time of sexual repression, and enjoying sexual intercourse was considered a sin during the time. And men and women are understood to be they were understood to be unable to control their sexual desires. So Freud takes a look at this and says that there's layers of consciousness in our mind, and that the unconscious mind influences your conscious behavior, which is something that we still believe today. So where does it come from, or what are the basic parts of it? Freud believes that the mind is divided into the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious minds. And he says that the unconscious is the most important determining factor in human behavior and personality. The conscious mind is it's what you're aware of. It's your own current awareness of what's going on. The preconscious mind is your memories and information and events that you can think of if you need to, but you're not currently thinking about it. And then the unconscious mind is not accessible by any any normal means. You cannot access it yourself. Thoughts, feelings, memories, and other information are kept here. They're not easily or voluntarily brought into consciousness. Some people say you can do it through hypnosis, and Freud tried to do it through dream interpretation, but this unconscious mind is the most important determining factor in human behavior and personality. And you can sort of look at Freud's conception of the personality as an iceberg. The iceberg represents the three levels of the mind. The conscious is above, the pre-conscious is just beneath the surface of your awareness, and then the unconscious is very super deep because you cannot access it. We're going to talk about the id, the ego, and the superego here in a second. The id is all the way at the bottom in the unconscious mind, and the superego and ego share the conscious mind and the pre-conscious mind. So basically, the id there's three parts to a personality. So that was the three parts of your mind. Here's your three parts of your personality. The id is if it feels good, do it. The ego is your executive director of the id and the superego. And the superego is your moral watchdog. So let's go a little bit into depth on these. The id is present at birth, and it is completely in the unconscious mind. Think of it as a stereotypical 2-year-old, runs around doing whatever it wants, no rules, satisfying desires immediately, pleasure-seeking, very primitive. So talk about aggression, sexual desire, hunger, these very primitive feelings we have all reside within the id. And the id operates on the pleasure principle. The desire for immediate gratification, no regard for laws or consequences. The ego is the part of the personality where it develops out of a need to deal with reality, which is mostly conscious, rational, and logical decisions. The ego operates on the reality principle. It kind of takes into account what the id wants and what the superego wants. And it works for both the id and the superego, and it is completely in touch with reality. The superego is your morals. They develop over your lifespan. It's the part of personality that acts as your moral center, and it is completely rigid. It is out of touch with reality. It is black and white and absolute. This is where your conscious is. It's the part of the personality that makes you feel guilt or moral anxiety when you're doing something you know is wrong. So how does this personality work? Basically, all these parts are in a constant state of conflict. And if it gets out of hand and the id becomes too powerful, or the superego becomes too powerful, or the ego doesn't allow either one to do what it wants, it can lead to disordered behavior and even mental disorders. How do we deal with this? We deal with it in what's called psychological defense mechanisms, which are things that we do unconsciously that distort our perception of reality, and it helps us to reduce stress and anxiety. Here are some defense mechanisms, such as denial, which is refusing to recognize or acknowledge a situation as what it is. Repression, which is pushing events out of conscious thought. If you can't remember emotional trauma as a child, your brain might be repressing it. There's rationalization, displacement, identification, and compensation. Using this information, Freud kind of comes up with 5 stages of personality development that he calls his psychosexual stages of personality development. It's tied to the sexual development of the child. And in this, you need to be aware of 2 things. One is called fixation, which is a disorder that can happen in later life. We call it other things today, but Freud said a child can become fixated at a certain stage. That's when you do not fully resolve the conflict in a particular psychosexual stage, and that results in personality traits changing and behavior that is associated with that stage coming out during later life. And then something called the erogenous zone would be the area of the body that produces pleasurable feelings. And each of these stages are named after the erogenous zone they're dealing with. The first one would be the oral stage, and that would be from birth through about 1.5, where everything is about the mouth. The baby to learn about the world sticks things in the mouth because the mouth is the erogenous zone. It's what gives the baby pleasure. First of all, what can a baby do when it's first born besides eat? That's how the baby gets pleasure. It's through its mouth. And so weaning people off this, off of the oral stage is the primary conflict. If a child becomes fixated at this stage and does not, maybe uses a pacifier too long or is on a bottle for too long, it may lead to personality traits associated with orally fixated adult personalities, like overeating, talking too much, smoking, nail biting, gum chewing. Anything associated with the mouth as an adult can be traced back to fixation during the oral stage. The anal stage is the second one, and this is about 1.5 to 3 years old, where it's all about potty training, and the anus is the erogenous zone. Toilet training is the source of conflict. If a person cannot get successfully toilet trained during this time, they may become anally expulsive or anally retentive, which would be, expulsive is very messy, destructive, and hostile as an adult, and a anal retentive person may be neat, fussy, stingy, and very stubborn as an adult. And you may think, what's the big deal? Everybody eventually gets potty trained. Well, what if you have an accident as a child and you're scolded for it? That could lead to anal retentiveness. Or what if you are allowed just to go to the bathroom or wherever? That could lead to anal expulsiveness. It's a very, very trying time for a young person. The phallic stage is about 3 to 6 years old, and this is where the child discovers their sexual feelings and they notice differences between themselves and the opposite sex. And Freud theorized in the unconscious mind of boys that they were suffering from the Oedipus complex, where the male child basically develops a sexual attraction to their mother and become jealous of the same-sex parent, their father. And then they would want to kill their father to covet their mother. But when they realize and they see their father and how powerful and superior he is, they realize that is not possible. Now, this is all happening in the unconscious mind. You can't think back and go, I never thought that when I was a kid. Of course none of us did. But it's in the unconscious mind where we're not aware of it. And the Electra complex is a similar process for girls where they just want to kill their mother to covet their father, but they realize that's not possible either. Latency is the fourth stage, and during latency, nothing really happens. The sexual feelings are repressed, and the child focuses on developing in other ways. The child during the stage develops intellectually, physically, and socially from 6 years old to about 12 years old. And from about 12 years old onward, the final stage is the genital stage, and this is how adults and teenagers would develop. The erogenous zone is the genitals. And so the sexual urges are allowed to move back into conscious mind, and the individual moves forward and moves toward adult social and sexual relationships. Other adolescents, celebrities, and other objects of adoration become the focus of a genital stage's sexual curiosity and attraction. Now, a lot of people disagreed with how Freud talked about these emphasis on sexual behavior, and they disagreed with this. And these people who studied under Freud and then moved on were called Neo-Freudians, or New Freudians, new ideas of Freud. They break away from psychoanalytic theory, and they focus more on the social relationships of children, but they do retain many Freudian concepts such as the id, ego, and superego, and defense mechanisms. So Carl Jung believes that the unconscious has a lot more than Freud was giving it credit for. He said that the collective unconscious was also a part of the unconscious, where we're all born with memories that are shared by all members of the human species. And some of these ancient fears and themes come out through folk tales and cultures, and they're consistent throughout all parts of the world. And in the collective unconscious are held archetypes, and these archetypes are the memories themselves. And there's many different ones, but some of them you may have heard of are the anima and animus, which are the feminine and masculine sides of all humans, and the persona, or the side of one's personality that you want to show to the world, similar to wearing a mask over how you really feel. Alfred Adler proposed that the driving force behind all human behavior is seeking superiority, because all humans feel inferior, and they suffer from an inferiority complex that superior adults are better than them. This can also be summed up in his idea of a sibling rivalry, where brothers and sisters are both vying for their parents' attention and affection. The defense mechanism that people use most is compensation, where they try to overcome these feelings of inferiority in one area of life by being superior in another area. Karen Horney disagrees with the Freudian view. Since she's a female Freudian, she disagrees with how males are superior, and with Freud's concept of penis envy, which is women try to overcome not having the genitalia that males do. She counters with her own idea of womb envy, which is that men feel the need to compensate for their lack of childbearing abilities. So I guess it's whichever one you want to look at. But she focuses on the basic anxiety that a child feels born into the world that is so much bigger and more powerful than the child, and how we cope with this anxiety forms the basis of our personalities. Some are well adjusted, where others move toward people becoming dependent on them, and others move against people and become aggressive and cruel if they don't have this stuff taken care of. And finally, we have Erikson, who we've already talked about in this class. He emphasizes social relationships rather than sexual ones, and he proposes the 8 psychosocial stages of life. Modern psychoanalytic theory, it's still around, although it doesn't focus on a lot of the unconscious ideas. Research has found support for defense mechanisms and the concept of an unconscious mind that influences conscious behavior. That's all I have for you today. I know it was a lot, but we'll talk about this psychoanalyst when we get back to class, and I will see you then. Have a nice night. Bye-bye.